These pictures are heartbreaking. This is a cemetery in Philadelphia, a Jewish cemetery, and unfortunately, about 500 tombstones and grave sites were desecrated. With me now is Rabbi Adam Zeff. He's a rabbi in the area. Adam, take me through when you got to that site, just what went through your mind when you saw this.
Well, the first thing that I thought of was I was just overwhelmed by sadness to see these markers of memory, the pieces of stone that people hoped would help them to remember their loved ones throughout the generations. To see these thrown to the ground was just, as you said, it was heartbreaking, and it was just, I was overcome by sadness in seeing it, and just the extent of it was so much more than I imagined from the very sketchy reports I'd heard at first. It really was, it was a devastating impact on the cemetery, and it really strikes at, in some ways, the heart of Jewish community in a lot of ways.
And these were historic graves and even memorials for children. We're not just talking about a traditional looking graveyard. There was more to this site. It's very historic.
Yes, it has. I mean, it's one of the first graveyards that the Jewish community established in Philadelphia. So that's part of what I meant when I said it strikes at the heart of the Jewish community. That's the first thing that Jews did upon arriving in cities in the U.S. like Philadelphia, was to buy land for burial. And often this was done in groups that would buy, people who had come from a particular village would buy plots in the same place, so that they would have a place to bury their loved ones, because that was such an important part of life. You know, death is a part of life, and remembering those who have passed is a sacred task. So that was a very important part for the Jewish community. And I think the other thing is that in Jewish tradition, there is this very strong feeling that memorializing the dead and caring for graves, even burial, is a pure act of love. It's an act of altruism, because you're doing something for someone who can never do something for you in return. And so to see that act of love desecrated is really, it really strikes the heart.
It's got to send chills through your spine, because this is a Jewish cemetery. By definition, this was targeted.
Yes, I mean, I did look when I was first driving to the cemetery. I noticed that it's a cemetery that's surrounded by several other non-Jewish cemeteries, and I looked to see if there were also gravestones toppled in those cemeteries, but there were not. So it did seem to be targeted only at this one cemetery.
Does it concern you? You mentioned to me when we were talking off camera that it seems like the anti-Semitic sentiment, for lack of a better way of putting it, is growing in the community, and that's something that is kind of an unspoken but everyone knows topic going on right now in Philadelphia.
Well, I think that the idea that anti-Semitism is growing in the United States right now is discussed a lot, and I think it seems to be unarguably true that anti-Semitic acts and hate crimes are on the rise very significantly, and especially in the last few months, but even in the last year. And that's really hit home for us now in Philadelphia. It was one thing to see it happening far away. To see the desecration of the cemetery in St. Louis was one thing. To see it happening in our own community really hits people very personally, and it really it shakes people. People often want to believe about all sorts of forms of hatred, including anti-Semitism and racism, that this is something that belongs to a previous generation, that somehow we've closed the book on that chapter of human history. And this just makes us realize all the more so in the Jewish community that anti-Semitism is alive and well, and that we have not closed the book on that, and we need to figure out ways to, both within the Jewish community and with the support of our partners of other faiths, to combat hatred and to stand up for the light of love that our religions tell us to practice and to have for each other.
You mentioned to me that one bright spot was people coming together to help at least begin the process of rebuilding. You mentioned it was not just folks of the Jewish faith, but it was almost a community effort to begin cleaning things up.
Yes, I mean, when I arrived at the cemetery, and as I said, I was very saddened by the devastation that I saw, and then I noticed that there were some people there who had gathered around a gravestone and were trying to pick it up. And it turned out that these were people from the community, some who lived very nearby on the same street as the cemetery, and had heard the news and were not only horrified, not only upset enough to say to their family or to say to their friends, this isn't right, but they felt motivated to come to the cemetery and to see what they could do to try to set it right. So some of those people were Christians, some of those people were Muslims, some of those people were Jews, and they gathered together lifting these stones and trying to set them back on their foundations. And then worked at that for several hours, really, until darkness started to fall, and we got word from the cemetery owner that they were asking us to stop doing that because they were developing a more thoroughgoing plan for doing it, and also through that experience, just in my own trying to help in the way I could, feeling the weight of these stones. In Jewish tradition, we speak of God as the rock of Israel, and the idea of stone as something everlasting is a really important part of our burial customs and the way we think about cemeteries. And these are massive pieces of stone, a lot of them granite, and they weigh hundreds of pounds. So many of them we tried to lift and just could not budge even a millimeter, but some of them we were able to. But the amount of force it took for someone to knock down these things and bring them to the ground really impressed on me the intention behind this. Whatever thoughts, you can't know what's going through someone's mind, but whatever was going through their mind, this was not a casual act. This was something that was done with great intention and with great force to make this happen to hundreds of gravestones.
Right, we're talking not just 100 or 200, but 500, 600 gravestones at least.
Yeah, it seems to be, from the count that someone did when I was at the cemetery, they counted over 500.
Wow. Well, police are investigating this, but in the meantime, there has been a fund set up to at least begin the process of restoration, if you will, of the site.
Yes, and that fund has been, as you might expect, and as is encouraging to see, very well supported, to the point where actually the website hosting it crashed.
Wow.
Because somebody's trying to give donations. And there's also was an offer of donations from a Muslim group, the same group that had raised money to repair the cemetery in St. Louis, reached out, and actually I met the person who began it at the cemetery. He came to the cemetery. He was planning to actually fly to Cleveland to visit a sick relative, and he turned around from the airport and came to the cemetery because he felt so strongly that as a Muslim he needed to stand up. I was very moved. Those moments of support. I like to think that in every moment of darkness, that God gives us little sparks of light to help light our way, and those people really are the sparks of light that give me hope in a very difficult time.
Listen, Rabbi, thank you for updating us on the situation. Let's stay in touch. Let's see where things go from here, and hopefully along the way we will see these good acts continue, and hopefully it'll send a message to whoever did this that they did not win.
I hope so. It was very discouraging and upsetting today that we had the news of bomb threats at one of our local Jewish elementary schools and at a Jewish community center nearby. And that also really hit home in our community. So there's those two things coming one day after the next really are hard blows to stand up under. But we do hope to see, as we saw today, there was an event and a news conference with a number of faith leaders from throughout Philadelphia, from different denominations of Christianity, from the Muslim community, expressing their support and their solidarity with the Jewish community. And we're also going to be having an event of Standing Against Hate on Thursday at noon for the Jewish community and our interfaith partners to express their opposition to a climate of hatred in this country, and say that we're actually here, we're in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection, and we are not going to accept hatred in our community.
I got to ask you this, if you were to speak, if you were speaking directly to people that are looking to you for leadership right now, what would be your words to them? What would your message be to them? I mean, it does feel like the Jewish community and the faith community in Philadelphia and across the country in different ways, they're getting battered left and right. What would you say to people to encourage them?
Well, I think I'd say to them what I said to my congregation. I wrote them a letter, an email in the middle of the night. I could not sleep, and I was thinking about this incident and what's going on in the country. And what I said to them is, we need to honor the feelings of fear, of anxiety that we have. Those are real, and these acts are real, and we can't close our eyes to a climate of hatred that is growing in its acceptance in the country at this moment. So we can't close our eyes to that, but neither can we close our eyes to, as I said, those sparks of light of people standing in solidarity with Jews, of people standing in solidarity with other minority communities. Those also are real, and we also have to think about those. And neither one of those cancels out the other. So we can't be completely sanguine and say, oh, well, there's no problem because we have lots of support. Neither can we say, go to the opposite extreme and say, ask the question, is the United States a place that's safe for Jews? I think we need to hold both the fear and anxiety and the hope and comfort that we get from those around us as we make our way through a very difficult time.
Absolutely, sir. Well, like I said, let's stay in touch. Hopefully we will see those points of light more than additional points of hate. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
You're welcome.